Hello, this is my fifth year talking to the first year students at Bainbridge High School, but my first during a pandemic. I realize most of you are already on Zoom, more hours than you'd prefer. So I've shortened my presentation to about 15 minutes. I'll be sharing several of the lessons I wish I had learned when I was in my first year of high school about 20,000 days ago. Whether I would have been open to listening back then is another story. Please take notes about anything I say that relates to your situation or that you'd like to remember or share with your family. First, I can briefly summarize my early childhood by saying my parents were abusive alcoholics and I was filled with pain and suffering. It wasn't a pretty story. In retrospect, I clearly had undiagnosed depression and anxiety. Because acknowledging, much less talking about mental illness was not encouraged back then, I eventually began taking drugs to mask this emotional pain. And by the time I was 17, I had barely graduated high school, was living in my car, and attending UCLA at the same time. I then fell madly in love with the 16-year-old cheerleader pictured here. Her parents forbid me to date her because of my bad reputation. But a year later, we ran away from home on the day she graduated high school. We were your basic anti-war, pro-civil rights hippies. We had a Buddhist wedding in 1969 and started a lifetime of drug-free spiritual practice. Not the easiest way to start a marriage, but we made it work. I was a software engineer on the space shuttle, did international sales for a tech company, and founded a consulting company in 1999. I wrote a successful book called Romancing the Buddha, which was also a one-man show I did at Bainbridge Performing Arts, and you can watch it on YouTube. We have 2 daughters, 2 grandchildren, and I write weekly articles for Bainbridge Currents. I also play harmonica and sing in a local blues rock band. My wife's a retired teacher and she tutors island students. So that's me. Now let's talk about you. This graphic is the theme of my talk today. Psychologists have found that people in their 50s and 60s whose primary focus in life was the top 2 gears in this diagram, the attainment of external, physical, and material goals, and spent little time on their internal growth, describe themselves as being less happy than they had hoped to be by that age. In general, they experienced higher levels of anxiety, suffered more from illness, and had a less of a sense of fulfillment. Looking back, I'm so grateful that I also spent time on developing treasures in my heart: wisdom, inner resolve, self-respect, and compassion for others. Without these, the physical and material treasures I acquired would have lacked meaning and left me hollow inside. Keeping this in mind, while you're in high school, I'd like to encourage you to seek out sources of inspiration, both through reading great books and regularly getting guidance from 1 or more mentors in life. For instance, a parent, therapist, religious leader, business person, or sports coach. These 2 habits will pay huge dividends in terms of your future success and happiness. Now I'd like to specifically discuss some of the biggest challenges according to an online survey I did of previous 9th graders. First, grades can be an excellent indicator of how well you're doing in a class. However, they can admittedly contribute to great personal angst. There are over 7 billion people in the world, so some of you might feel insignificant. You might wonder, what does it matter how well I do? Well, fortunately, each of you is unique. There will never be anyone else exactly like you in this world. This means there's absolutely nothing to be gained by comparing your situation to that of your peers. You might have a friend who easily gets all A's on her report card, while you struggle to achieve a B average. So what? Feeling inferior to someone else is like counting your neighbor's wealth. You can't spend it. It's not yours. Instead, respect yourself for who you are and determined to do your best to improve your results. That's all that matters. If you're the type of person who feels they have to get all A's on your report card no matter what, then don't be too hard on yourself if you get a B in a class. While grades are important, you're not your grades. Life is too short to have that much stress about a single grade. It took me a long time to finally realize that no one is perfect. And seeking perfection is a mental habit that will eventually result in considerable stress. Instead, let your guide be that you tried your very best. I realize it can be very difficult to concentrate in Zoom classes, but your efforts to succeed in school, especially during these challenging times, will allow you to establish a strong foundation for your struggles and successes later in life. When I finished high school, I was living in my car and occasionally a friend's living room. I had absolutely no idea what the next day was going to bring, much less my future career. Looking back, I have lived a surprisingly rich, productive life with no regrets. Now, my brother, on the other hand, knew from a young age that he wanted to be a dentist. He pursued and achieved this goal. Both of us ended up happily retired, even though we followed completely different paths. He did recently express to me that he wished he had spent more time exploring other interests while he was in high school and college, so he could have related to different types of people. This can be a useful life lesson for those of you who already know what you'd like to do as a future career. Anxiety happens when you think you have to figure out everything now at your age, or you become too attached to what you think you want to become. I'm sure a lot of you probably have no idea what you might want to do. And even though some of your friends have it figured out, there is absolutely no need for you to worry. It is better to give yourself time to explore than to force yourself to make a decision based on outside pressures. The plus side of having so messed up my high school experience was that I was free to try different options. I don't necessarily recommend doing things this way, but it does illustrate that it is never too late to get your life back on track. So take your time. Since not all your dreams will come true, while you're young, why not dream big? Every time you go outside your comfort zone and try something new, you will grow as a human being. If you avoid uncertainty, you will become stagnant. I'm so glad I put myself out there to experience new things. It allowed me to be a writer, artist, and musician. You're all young adults now. Some of you will probably only talk to your parents or guardian a short time each day. So for all practical purposes, you are making all the choices that will determine your future results. I want to encourage you to accept responsibility for your actions. Every kid wants $1 million of good parenting, but the best parents can maybe give you a few $100,000. So try to avoid blaming things on your parents, teachers, friends, or society. It really won't make you happy. Only you can do that. Frankly, I'm amazed that I survived my high school years. There was so much pressure for me to stay stoned, both to deal with the stress in my home life and to be accepted by my friends. And I lost too many of those friends to self-harm and overdoses. And while it might not seem like a big deal to drink some alcohol or take a few drugs on the weekend, please realize that your brain is still creating new neural networks into your early 20s. The mental habits you're reinforcing in high school will stick with you the rest of your life. It took me about 10 years to reprogram myself from the negative consequences of my high school behavior. Social acceptance and momentary highs just aren't worth it. There are much more constructive ways to deal with the stresses you're currently facing. I've learned much more from my failures than my successes. In 1976, I was in charge of the New York Bicentennial Parade. I personally led the several cars driving the VIPs, including the governor, right past the review stand where they were supposed to be sitting, almost all the way to Central Park. I had to move aside several marching bands and move horses over to get everyone back to the review stand. I got in big trouble. But I learned a valuable lesson about checking every detail of a plan and the potential negative impact of being arrogant and taking things for granted. Doing or saying something wrong can give rise to many emotions, including regret, dismay, and guilt. These reactions are normal. However, after a short period of remorse, it's important to reflect on the lessons you can learn and make a determination not to make the same mistake again. It is then equally important to forgive yourself and move on with your life. Whether at school or at a job, being able to work well with others is the key to success. Gossip and negativity create disunity and reflect poorly on your character. They also drain your energy when you need it the most. You won't like all your teachers. For that matter, your supervisors when you're in the workplace. What is important is for you to find something to learn from them. There will always be things to complain about. But complaining about high school, even during this pandemic, will not make anything better. However, it is perfectly reasonable to talk one-on-one to your teachers about any difficulties you're having in their class. They want you to succeed, and keeping your frustration buried inside will only add to your unhappiness. I remember how easy it was to fall into a pattern of making fun of other students when I was in high school. Passing notes in class was our form of Instagram. It's probably even more tempting now with the advent of social media. However, please be aware that you never know how much the person you are commenting about might be close to an emotional breaking point. Your seemingly harmless comment about the clothes they wore on Zoom could very well get back to that person. It might be the straw that broke the camel's back and causes that person to do something tragic to themselves or others. This has happened more than once in the last year. Later in life, you'll also regret your actions. So at all times, let's treat each other with respect. It can be exhausting to be with people who dominate conversations and aren't interested in what other people think. On the other hand, we don't get to know people who keep their thoughts to themselves. So speak up if you're the type of person that doesn't. I used to feel compelled to express my opinion about everything. Once I became a management consultant, I had to train myself to be a better listener. Some people just aren't open to views different than their own. But I've learned, sometimes the hard way, that individuals I initially disliked are the ones I often learn the most from, either by not acting like them, or getting constructive feedback about my own behavior through honest, respectful dialogue. Today's socio-political climate is extremely divisive. There doesn't seem to be any way for people with different views to reach an understanding. But you can be the kind of person who seeks to understand other points of view by actively listening to your family, teachers, and friends instead of just blindly clinging to and spreading your own opinions. Remember, dialogue is a two-way street. I know from surveying high school students a few years ago that at any given time, about 1/3 of you are struggling with some form of depression or anxiety. This number is probably even higher in this time of COVID-19. For those of you who know someone who has depression, please be supportive. Clearly, if you have a friend who has diabetes, you will encourage them to see their doctor and take their insulin. Similarly, I hope you will be supportive of your friends who need to see a therapist and take an antidepressant for their illness. No one wakes up in the morning thinking, I hope I have diabetes today. Neither do people with depression. We can't just snap out of it, or we would. And don't take it for granted that your friend is okay just because they aren't talking about their feelings. Life is precious and we don't want to lose anyone, so make sure they're okay. I also realize it must be especially difficult for some of you to deal with being socially isolated and inundated with negative world news on social media. For those of you who are struggling emotionally right now, please don't bury your pain. You're not broke. Depression doesn't mean you are less than whole. Everyone has challenges in life. Some might lose a loved one or face a serious illness, or in your case, struggle with depression. I've lived with a mental illness, as well as my wife's multiple sclerosis for many years. So my challenge has been to grab on to every positive support person and tool I can to survive. I'm proof that regardless of family circumstances or mental and physical health, you can build a joyful, creative life. Don't wait. Ask for help. Bainbridge Youth Services has a cadre of professional therapists, so make an appointment. It's free and confidential. Or if your school doesn't have this capability, get a referral from your doctor. Do whatever you need to become happier. I promise that just like the lotus flower in a muddy swamp, eventually your life will blossom. The turbulent world around me when I was your age, including the Vietnam War and the threat of nuclear war with the Soviet Union, practically paralyzed me with fear. These words by Buddhist scholar Daisaku Ikeda really encourage me. He said, quote, "If we cannot feel hope, it is time to create some. If we can do this by digging deeper within, searching for even a glimmer of light, for the possibility of a way to begin to break through the impasse before us," unquote. Now I realize the problems that are facing your generation are complex and daunting in their depth. Sometimes it may be hard to see where or how to begin, but let's not be overcome by despair. It's true that if our ability to feel hope depends on the state of the world, we're out of luck. But fortunately, hope is in our mind. That's something we can work to control and experience every day. And yes, you can all make a difference. One person can change the course of a class, a project, an entire nation of the world. We have no way of knowing the future impact of even a kind word or a generous gift. This semester, take some time to befriend a student who is different from you. I guarantee it will make a huge difference in both of your lives. I've learned that the efforts I've made to help others have come back to me tenfold. Finally, every morning, let's renew our determination to fight for equality and make a positive difference in the world. As Gandhi says, good travels at a snail's pace. Here are some self-assessment questions that will be on a handout you'll get from your teacher. I'd recommend you refer back to these every 3 months. I've heard back from other students that this really helped them. You can find my current series of hopeful articles about how my own experience and prominent people's thoughts relate to the coronavirus at this website address. I want to thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing about your incredible accomplishments this school year.